So we're going to dive right in here. Again, as Cole said, we're going to talk about storytelling with data, primarily around data visualization. So initially, we want to go over what is data visualization. So a quote I like by Hans Rosling is, most of us need to listen to the music to understand how beautiful it is, but often that's not how we present data. We just show the notes, we don't play the music. To me, this is kind of a big issue in not just healthcare, but in marketing in general. We know how to interpret this data. We can look at it and extrapolate what we need from it. But as we show it to others, which we'll go over the different audiences, we don't always display it in a way that they can understand or appreciate. So we're going to go over ways to play the music. So data visualization is valuable as an analytical and communicative tool because the insights it provides through visually apparent cues, patterns, and trends makes data more digestible. Data visualization is customized to meet the information needs of specific intended audiences and stakeholders, and it is designed to reduce the likelihood of stakeholders misunderstanding or misinterpreting data. What data visualization is not is emphasizing presentation over message in a way that distorts or distracts from the meaning or gets more complex or creative than it needs to be to accurately convey data meaning. So one of the things that we'll be touching on quite a bit are those last two bullet points and how to get your message across in a visual and nice and neat, aesthetically pleasing way without taking away from the overall message that the data is trying to convey. So why does this matter? 90% of the information transmitted to the brain is visual. Humans process images 60,000 times faster than text. 70% of our sensory receptors are in our eyes, and 65% of people are visual learners. Studies have also shown that while only 10 to 20% of written or spoken data is remembered, 65% of information is remembered when it's presented visually. In short, what this means is visual data is easier to remember than words. Just as an example of this working, at the end of this, I might ask what one of these statistics are and see if people can remember. So what is data visualization? As we look at this, this is some search query data from New York. In a table format, you can see nice data, it's presented nicely, but it's hard to really tell what we're trying to depict with this table here. But if we put it into a more visual format, we can pretty easily see the trend between people searching for the solar eclipse in New York and my eyes hurt in New York. Immediately after solar eclipse searches reach their peak, my eyes hurt reached their peak. So with the table initially, we couldn't really see how those two things correlated very easily, but this is a really easy to digest and pretty fun way to see how those things work together. So as you dive into your data and trying to make it more visual and appealing, the first thing you need to know is what data to use. So you need to ask the right questions. Why are you doing this? What story are you trying to tell? Who is your audience? And how actionable is this data? If you ask yourself these 4 questions before you put together your reports or dashboards or one-pagers, you're a lot more likely to provide the most actionable data possible. So first, why are you doing this? It's possible that you're trying to optimize a campaign, you're providing ROI data to your stakeholders, you're analyzing your site's performance, you're trying to map out user behaviors, or you're trying to understand your patients or potential patients. There are a lot more ways or a lot more reasons you might be trying to pull this data together and tell your story. These are just some of the ones that come to mind quite a bit and come up in conversations. So knowing the difference between these and the why behind your data is very useful. Once you know the why, understand what story you're trying to tell. So maybe you're just comparing data across some different platforms or across different initiatives, and you want to see how the synergy is and how things are correlating together. Maybe you're trying to identify how data sets interact and align within a platform. Maybe you're just trying to understand your data distribution a little bit better with all the different ways that we get data, whether it's through social media insights and their own platforms or Google Analytics. Sometimes it's really tough to see those things side by side and really correlate. Maybe you're just trying to analyze trends to try to do some forecasting or predicting on the next things you should do. This is really popular with content marketing or content hubs, trying to understand that around a certain time of year, people start looking for flu shot or flu type of pieces. Then you know to start producing those around that time. And finally, maybe you're just trying to showcase some results, showcase your growth, or just prove ROI. So now that we know the why we're doing it and what story we're trying to tell, we need to know how to present that information to a specific person or persons. So maybe that person's yourself, and instead of going into 4 different platforms to analyze your data, you're just trying to build out a dashboard to quickly assess how things are going. Maybe it's to your stakeholders and you're trying to get more dollars for your marketing budget, or you're trying to just prove that things you're doing are working and that marketing is not just a bottom line thing. Maybe it's for your marketing team and you want to have one source of truth where they can take action off of that data. You might have an agency or partners that you need to kind of present data to, or vice versa, you're trying to get them to present data to you in a way that you can digest. And maybe it's to your patients and visitors. This is, I think, an often forgotten subset of people that you need to present data to. They're making big decisions, and you can help guide them down the right path of choosing you by presenting data and things that set you apart in a really aesthetically pleasing way. Finally, you have to ask how actionable this data is. Sometimes if you're just trying to analyze things, you don't necessarily intend to take action, but more often than not, you want to take the data and then do something with that data. So the best data gives you a clear next step. Your audience should be able to make a decision or understand your decision based off the data. Your data should correlate with your measurable goals. I don't know if anybody else out there has run into it before where you show data you're really proud of to somebody and they say something along the lines of, what am I looking at here? Data visualization is a really nice way to help avoid those conversations and make the what am I looking at here a lot more obvious. So now that we've asked the questions, we know what data we're showing, we know who we're showing it to, and we know the story we're trying to show and the actions we want them to take. We need to decide the best way to organize and present that data. So when to choose a table or a chart. So tables are useful if you have large amounts of data. It gives you the ability to drill down further into that data, as you can have a lot more data within the table than you would a chart. If you need your figures to be really precise, that's a good opportunity to use the data. As we saw with the solar eclipse and the My Eyes Hurt, the table had a lot more figures in it, whereas the trend lines, you probably didn't pay much attention to the actual numbers as much as just how those lines interacted with each other. So if you need your figures to be precise, that's usually a good indicator that you should be utilizing a table. If the data requires attention, a table allows you to call that out a little bit easier. As far as charts go, if you have fewer data sets that you want to just showcase, you can use a chart. If the data needs to be simplified, going again back to the solar eclipse example, we didn't really need to know the exact search volume over any given time. So we just wanted to show the trend between the two and how those two correlated. So simplifying that was the best move there. If your data is more quantitative rather than qualitative, and if you're trying to showcase trends, as I've mentioned a couple of times, charts are a really good way to do that. So some types of charts and when to use them. So we can see there on the left, we have the column or bar chart. So this is a good opportunity to compare trends between different groups and track more significant changes over time. Bars are really easy to compare. These are really popular if you do year-over-year type of comparisons. A line chart is better for showing an overall trend, as you can kind of follow maybe a time series or how things interact over time. It's easier to see small fluctuations than on a bar graph. Bar graphs, as kind of there in category 2 in the example, when they get a little bit closer, it's hard sometimes to really quickly identify those fluctuations, where on a line, it's a lot easier to see a dip or a spike. And it allows you to compare changes over time for more than one group at the same time. As we can see there, we have 3 different series within the same chart. Stacked columns or bars or lines, however you want to utilize those, but stacked charts allow you to focus on comparing the parts of multiple totals. So you can see how an individual category matches up. We have a couple examples of this working pretty well a little bit later. You have a pie chart. Most of the things you read online about data visualization try to nudge you away from pie charts. I think they still have a place, definitely, though I do agree they're pretty overused. But if you need to compare parts of a whole in this, so most of you are probably familiar with doing this for maybe the device breakdown of your traffic for mobile and desktop and tablet. Pie charts are pretty common there. It allows you to compare the parts of the whole, but not necessarily compare changes over time. Even if you utilize multiple pie charts, just like the bars and the fluctuation, it's really hard to really see those changes over time. And one of the recommendations for pie charts is not to use more than 8 slices. Once you get up to 8 slices, it's probably a good indicator that you should be looking for a different chart type, as the wedges get very small and it's really hard to visualize that. Oh, all right, we're a little off on the clicks here. Bubble chart is used to display 3 or 4 metrics on one chart using X and Y axis to kind of indicate different metrics or dimensions. And then it allows you to not only adjust the color of the bubble, but the size as well to indicate different things. We have another good example of this in practice later on. A radar chart, which is a little less utilized than the other ones here, is a really good way to measure results versus a goal. So in the example down there, some made up figures, but we can see that second quarter, that red bar really exceeds the one on the outside, so exceeded the goals. Fourth quarter fell short of those goals. So we have another example of this as it relates to staffing a little bit later and how to use that to your advantage. The next step would be knowing whether or not you should combine visual elements. Sometimes you might like one chart, or one chart might fit the story or narrative or data you're trying to present, but you want to use some other elements as well. So when you should combine, if you're showcasing trends with static data, so a good example of that, which we'll have here in a minute, is if you have a bar or line chart and you want to showcase really specific numbers, maybe through default channel groupings, and then how those trend, so having some bars and lines in the same chart. If you want to highlight micro data within a macro chart, which we'll show with a table here in a second. If you're telling multiple stories with one graphic, sometimes even though you're presenting to one audience or you're presenting one set of data, there might be different stories within that data that you want to call out, and so combining those visual elements allows you to do that. So here's the one I was talking about, where we wanted to see how revenue, organic sessions, and organic searches and sessions compared over time throughout the day of the week. So we have some static data with the sessions over the day of the week and how those measure up, and then how much revenue those generate. And then we have the trend lines for revenue and organic searches. So this is a really good way to identify that Wednesday, for example, has the most sessions, has the most traffic out of all the other days of the week, but revenue takes a big dip there despite organic searches going up. So this is an opportunity to maybe dive in and analyze on Monday what's working so well that the revenue is so high despite the sessions being lower. So there's a lot of different stories you could tell with this. It's a really good gateway into diving a little bit deeper into your data, which is where something like this might come in. So similarly, we wanted to compare some general basic demographic information, such as age and gender, broken down by the different mediums, and then see how that affected the revenue. So there's a lot of different things going on in this table, but it still presents itself as being neat, tidy, and aesthetically pleasing. And it allows you to quickly identify some correlations. For example, as the bounce rate gets higher and those yellow bars get a little bit darker, the revenue starts dropping as well. Whereas the lower bounce rates, the revenue stays high. So we can break that down a little bit further, which we'll do once we dive into filters a little bit. So some further comparative data, when to use that. If you're trying to decide next steps, it's nice to compare apples to apples as much as possible. If you're trying to show growth and reduction, so this is another thing where you want to do some comparative data. This is especially popular with paid advertising. We made some optimizations to our campaigns. Is that working? Did things get better? Did things get worse? The only way to really know that is if you're comparing before you made changes to after you made changes. And if you're trying to analyze your ROI, so what we were just doing with that table, trying to get an idea of where the ROI was coming from, who the most likely to spend was, and really processing that type of data by comparing a few different data sets. And then tracking strategic initiatives. So if you're trying to see, you have a campaign about maybe opening a new urgent care facility, and you're pushing that through email marketing, social media, you have some paid ads going, and you're trying to optimize organically through local SEO, really pulling those things together and aggregating that data and presenting it in such a way where you can tell what's working, what's not working, and where the pitfalls are with that strategy. So an example of comparing multiple data sets. So here we have our default channel groupings across the bottom, our revenue going up, and then we wanted to break it down further by device. As we know, the more we go forward with technology, mobile is starting to dominate more and more and more. And so it's really easy to fall into the mindset that I need to be focused on mobile all the time, no matter what. And as we look into data like this and we see it kind of laid out in front of us, no matter what the channel is, desktop is still dominating as far as revenue goes. So it's a good indicator that maybe users on desktop are more motivated to spend money or to register for your events or however it is that you're gauging revenue. They're more motivated to do that than mobile users, and then how those things can fluctuate across the channel. So organically, mobile users are pretty similar in that motivation to spend, but once you get over to social, people on mobile are far less likely to spend than desktop, and people on tablets aren't spending. So one chart can tell us a lot about our users by comparing 3 different data sets at the same time. Another example of comparing data within a single set. So here we have revenue over time broken down by age ranges. So this is one similar to the pie chart, where once you start getting too many segments, it gets really sloppy and it's harder to take this and really digest it and analyze it and understand what it's trying to tell you and what the story is. We can make some really simple observations about the spikes with the 35 to 44 segment of people, but beyond that, the overlays get really sloppy. So it's a nice example of how focusing too much on the design and the graphic element and less on the data and the story can be counterproductive. So I mentioned before, utilizing filters to really drill down on your data and make more qualitative and quantitative decisions based on that data. So some reasons why we would use filters is if you, again, want to further dissect that data, if you want to tell a more compelling story, if you want to get a more granular understanding of your ROI, and you want to make your data less overwhelming. So the same table we had before, we add some filters on top for the dimensions and the metrics we're utilizing. So we have medium, age, which is open to kind of showcase what that looks like in Google Data Studio, and then gender. So for this example, we wanted to really dive in to a certain age bracket that we think drives pretty good revenue, and we wanted to see for our paid advertising how that breaks down as far as gender. So what that ends up looking like here is we selected the medium for CPC, which is pay-per-click. We selected 25 to 34 for our age range, and then we left gender alone because we wanted to see how male and females stack up within this specific segment. So we can see here that males age 25 to 34 drive almost all of the revenue for our paid traffic. So we can pretty quickly assess this, establish trends. We can see that the delta over on the side, that the female group dropped 100% month over month, whereas the males are up almost 200%. And so we could make some decisions right away and add some bid modifiers or even bid reductions across genders on our paid advertising to better represent this data and take advantage of the motivation to spend. So filters are really handy in taking something that could be overwhelming and then getting it to a point where you can really digest it. So making data-driven decisions. So that's kind of what all of this is about, is being able to really analyze your data and then make some decisions based off that data to either improve ROI or make your different marketing initiatives better, or just make other internal decisions, which we can go over. So allowing your data to drive those decisions, which data visualization makes even easier, allows you to take the guesswork out of your paid advertising. It allows you to get easier buy-in from internal stakeholders. Again, this is something that data can do digitally, but having it presented in a really visual and easy to digest way makes that buy-in even easier. You get to avoid that, what am I looking at here? You don't have to explain things as much. You can just kind of let the data speak for itself because you've already catered it to that specific audience. It allows you to connect with your patients more. This is kind of the humanizing data aspect of it. As you put things into a visual manner, you will kind of subconsciously start connecting that more with the people behind the data as opposed to just being numbers and statistics. So once you can make those connections a little bit more and you understand that those different subsets of real humans interact with your site in different ways, interact with your initiatives in different ways, you can then target those people a lot easier and with a lot more success, which gives you higher conversion rates on your paid advertising. And across the board, it increases your ROI because you can really quickly understand what's not working and what is. So one of the things that we can do is use the data to answer a question. So for this example, we're talking about our website, and we're thinking that maybe we might have a UX issue. We want to know if users are naturally finding what they need. Do we need to look into our UX? Do we need to look into a redesign? Does a user's ability to navigate our site impact revenue? And that's kind of what it comes down to. We want to make the user experience as seamless and intuitive as possible, but at the end of the day, as long as it's driving the revenue we expect it to drive, or as long as it's driving the action we expect it to drive, that kind of dictates where that concern is. So here, the bar chart was our best option to compare those data sets. So we looked at site search status. Site search is a really good indicator of whether or not people can naturally find things on your website. The more they have to use the site search, the less intuitive your IA and your navigation is. So we wanted to compare that across all the different channels because we know from experience that those can all interact very differently, and how that measured up with revenue. So we can see pretty alarmingly here that visits without site search drive a vast majority of the revenue compared to visits with site search. And beyond that, outside of direct, organic, and referral traffic, the other paid search, email, social media, all of that traffic that ends up using site search has provided zero revenue over year to date. So as we're trying to push people to do these things and take action. This type of data lets us know that user experience and being able to navigate intuitively and get what you're looking for without having to use site search is a really good driver for those people to take action. People that are using site search are maybe getting annoyed. They're having to refine their search too much. They're bouncing, they're leaving the site, and ultimately not driving revenue. So this is a really powerful graphic that even actually while building this, using this data for this, I was kind of alarmed and actually went in and looked a little bit further because this can be a really big game changer for the organization. You can use data to solve a staffing problem. So as we look for data and we think about taking action on that data, it's usually around marketing, or it's around creating different initiatives or seeing how things interact with each other. It's mostly external. It's what do we do outside of our organization with this data to drive the organization forward or reach those organizational goals, which is fantastic. But we often forget about using the same sort of approach to make decisions internally. So our hypothetical problem here is your marketing team is working on their staffing budget for the next few years. How do you determine where to spend those dollars for your budget? So this is a really good opportunity to use that little utilized chart here and see we've established that what we think our team needs in marketing is somebody that is efficient in content development, content strategy, SEO, social media marketing, and search engine marketing. We've established where we want to be with those, where we think we need to be, and this might take into account agency partnerships. This might be a chart for your agency to determine who can best suit your needs. So we have the darker, the black dashes and dots there representing what we think we need for those things, and then the red dashes and dots showing where we currently sit. So looking at this, we can really easily see that we're good to go on content development, we're good to go on SEM, we're right where we need to be on content strategy. Maybe it's something we look into a little bit to make sure we stay there. Social media marketing, we have some area of improvement. And then on the SEO side, we're nowhere near where we want to be. So as we look into where do we spend those dollars and how do we best utilize that budget to ramp up our staffing, this might be a really good opportunity to do that. And then on the side, the bar chart to just kind of go with it to kind of indicate a little bit more precisely how those things measure up. Again, we can see search engine optimization right away is kind of off the charts compared to where we need to be. So you can take this back and have those conversations about here's what we've established and where we have those needs and having some data to back that up. And then finally, kind of the biggest one that this goes towards is using that data to solve a marketing problem. So the hypothetical problem is our hospital just opened an urgent care in North Carolina, and there's a lot of competition. So how do we decide how to distinguish ourselves from the competition, and how do we get buy-in from stakeholders for the direction you want to take your paid advertising strategy? So a quick bubble chart, kind of a keyword gap analysis here. We can see we have average keyword cost per click, and then average keyword impressions or volume, however you want to look at that. And then some of the top keywords that we kind of feel internally are differentiators, having longer hours, accepting more various types of insurance, having on-site x-ray, things like that. And so we have the bubble size kind of indicated by the cost per click and the volume combined. So we can see really quickly that not only is ours receiving more volume than the other keywords, but it has a lower cost per click as well. So as we kind of develop that strategy around our paid advertising, we're running some Google ads, we can immediately tap into the hours and talk about how our hours are different than the competition and how we're open later or open earlier or open 24 hours because we already know based on the keyword impression volume that that's what people care about. That's what they're looking for the most. And not only are we tapping into the primary need of the users, but we're doing so for a lower cost per click. So it's a really good opportunity to get the ball rolling on what that looks like. And then after that, when you implement that strategy, you have to gauge the performance. So this is that comparative data piece again. This is understanding that we made this decision based on data. Did that work for us? So we can see some overtime data here, covering a whole year. Our organic search for the SEO efforts, social media traffic, paid search campaigns, and then our trend line there is for phone number clicks, which is determined to be a really good call to action or conversion point for this specific campaign. So as we start those paid search campaigns, we made a decision to tackle the hours aspect, have that be our differentiator. We see the paid search traffic just kind of skyrocket there. And then similarly, following a very similar trajectory, the phone number clicks increasing as well. So this is a really good way to go back afterwards and say, we showed you data around the approach we wanted to take on paid advertising, and here's how it paid off. Here's the increase in conversions. Tying this to some revenue figures goes even further, and just showcasing that those data-driven decisions worked out there. So next up is really learning how to put it all together and analyzing what next steps to take. So here's an example of one of the reports we would put together. This is just an acquisition report, mainly just to analyze the website, how things are going, and where things are trending. This one isn't necessarily designed with a specific story in mind, but this is one that you can drill down into further and kind of discover those stories along the way. So what this does, it allows you to stay up to date with the data that matters to you, because with Google Data Studio, you can pick all of these different metrics. You can hand plant everything here. So in this case, because it's around acquisition, we wanted to see how the different channel groupings really stacked up against each other and how they were correlating, month over month or year over year, however you want that time to break down. And then we can see cities driving the traffic there. This is really helpful because you can analyze all the different traffic sources or specific traffic sources from individual cities, and then determine if that's something, maybe an opportunity to open a new clinic somewhere, or to just tap into a market that might be underserved, who are already engaging with you. So really good way to stay up to date with the data that matters to you, track your progress towards your organizational goals. Maybe, as I was saying, an opportunity for a specific market or a secondary market. Maybe you've already implemented that and you're running some social media campaigns in a specific city. This is a good way to see if that's working and see if you're starting to get some traction in that area. It also allows you to create dynamic dashboards for stakeholders. So as we went over filters, and you can see the device category filter on top of this example, it allows you to create one report and then do some work with the filters and segments and be able to give this report to multiple different audiences with multiple different needs, and cater it in a way that they can appreciate, that they can take action on themselves without having to create dozens of different dashboards or dozens of different reports. You can utilize the same data, just displayed in a way that's more specific to them. Another example here based around social media. So this one's a Facebook analysis. So if we're really active on social media and we're looking at the last month, we can check how many posts we've been doing, the impressions those posts have gotten, new likes to the page, total likes on the page, how many people we're reaching, the different engagement in our posts. And beyond this, what it allows you to do is analyze the performance, so we can see that trend line for post engagements, the last 30 days compared to the 30 days before that. So we can see we had some reductions in engagement, during the middle of that time frame. which allows us to see that and identify that immediately, go back in and look and see what the difference is. Maybe we were posting more photos this month than we were last month. Maybe there's different links. Maybe we're posting at different times. So really analyzing the ins and outs of how these things operate and how that correlates with engagement. And then so we can see kind of, as I mentioned down there, the what posts are getting shared. So people are sharing posts with links more often than photos. Typically when you try to look up different strategies around social media on the internet, almost all of them will point to, photos increase engagement by X%. Photos are the way to make people share your posts and like your posts. And I think having a best practice and having that sort of initial setup is important, but allowing your own data and your own users to really dictate how you do things is a lot more beneficial in the long run. So for this example, we can see that photos aren't as popular. Posts that have links in them are getting shared more often. So if we're just sticking to best practice and ignoring our own data, we're missing a really big opportunity there. So this allows you to develop a post strategy, diving into this data and seeing that, when we post at 6 p.m., we get, excuse me, when we post at 6 p.m., we have a 80% higher engagement rate than if we're posting at 5 in the morning. So taking that data, seeing it all together in one place can allow you to plan out in the future and better decide how you want to present that information to your users. So it allows you to take advantage of those insights. And as I mentioned a couple of times throughout, you can pull this information straight from Facebook into your Data Studio and then pull some analytics information right there into the same dashboard. So you don't have to bounce between reports, or even worse, bounce between platforms to try to get this data. And then you're having multiple tabs open, you're printing things out, you're trying to compare things side by side, and it never works very well. This allows you to do that in one place and combine those things on one report. And similar to everything else we're doing, it lets you get to know the humans behind your data. It lets you know that the people who are engaging with you are certain demographics, or they engage at certain times of day or certain days of the week. They engage with a certain post type, as we see there with like the links versus photos. It allows you to get to know the actual people and what they're looking for. So to kind of recap, you want to make sure you ask the right questions. So why are you doing this? What story are you trying to tell? Who is your audience? Oh, and then we forgot, is it actionable? So don't forget that one too. So I said before that I wanted to see if we could remember text-based information. So maybe go ahead and put it in the chat or something, or just say it out loud if you remember what percentage of information transmitted to the brain is visual. I'm not going to give very much time. You know it or you don't. 90%. 90% of information transmitted to the brain is visual. So it's really important to keep in mind that even if somebody isn't necessarily a visual learner, the ability to retain visual information is drastic, and the ability to really get your message across with visuals as far as trends and correlating data is much easier. So you're not only going to help them retain it and digest it, you're going to make less work on yourself than trying to throw these massive tables together. So the key takeaways, in my opinion, you guys can take away whatever you felt was important, would be that visual data is easier to remember, that you need to know what data to use, you need to know what problem you're trying to solve with that data, who your audience is, and is your data actionable. You need to choose the best way to visualize your data. So choosing between charts, tables, single data points, comparative data, creating dashboards, having a combination of all these things, understanding not just what's the best way to cater to your specific audience, but what's the best way to put this data in a visual manner so some things just don't work for certain visual types. And then putting your data visuals into action. That's kind of the bottom line for everything, is you need to be able to do something with your data. If you look at your data and you just think, that's interesting, that doesn't do much for you, you arguably just wasted some of your time in putting that together. You need to be able to take some sort of action, even if that action is choosing that, yep, what we're doing is working. I think that can constitute as an action. All right, we got through it pretty quick. I'm kind of a rambler, so we have a little bit of time here for questions, I believe.
Right now, I think, Tim, you and I had talked at a prior run through about, this is focused on Google Data Studio and using that tool, but I'm not sure if you wanted to give just a quick overview of some of the other tools that are out there that can do this kind of thing. I know the big selling point for the Google tool is that it integrates with analytics and is also free, but are there some other tools out there for data visualization that are worth mentioning?
Yeah, I think kind of the big one out there would probably be Tableau. Tableau can do some really remarkable things with data, especially around the visualization front. It can also be kind of an all-encompassing analytics as well, but you pay a pretty hefty price tag for that. I think beyond Data Studio being free, which I think is for me a massive selling point, the fact that I don't have to pay for it, is it allows for some different plugins to be utilized with it. One of them that I like a lot is Supermetrics, which is it's a paid plugin, but very reasonable, and it allows you to tap into not only social media accounts, but MailChimp and SurveyMonkey and all these other tools that you're probably using anyways, constant contact, and pulling that data into your dashboard. I think beyond what we've been talking about the whole time around data visualization and using that to tell a story and to get buy-in and have people understand what you're trying to do and take action. The other big thing around Data Studio and data visualization and these dashboards more specifically is just pulling things in from a lot of different areas into one. That completely by itself, even if you're not handing this data off to anybody but yourself, that's a game changer. I mean, that saves hours and hours a week just from having to log in and do other things by getting that all in one spot.
Great. I have a question here. When preparing a PowerPoint presentation, what's the recommended descriptor to accompany a graph/chart? How much background info should surround it? I'm not sure if we need more context on that, or if that is something you want to take a stab at, Tim.
Yeah. So I think it kind of depends on what angle you're looking at it through. And the reason I say that is we just did a webinar. Amanda from Geo did a webinar around accessibility last month. And one of the big things that we're tackling as an organization, and I think a lot of you are probably tackling as well, is accessibility. And that extends far beyond just your website. It extends to your presentation, so your PowerPoints, and if you are displaying those graphics and those charts, things like that on your website, then it definitely applies there as well. But they require, accessibility kind of requires you to have that data accessible. So if I can't read that chart or see that chart, I need to be able to get the same type of information from a screen reader or something like that. So I think that kind of has to dictate that question a little bit. Had it been a few years ago before this was really hitting people's radar, I would have probably been a lot more ignorant to the answer to that. But I would say as much to kind of complement and pay off that graph or that chart as possible. I would have that if you can.
Another question would be, so let's set the scenario of you've got this report that you've prepared and you're going to share it internally with, some other stakeholders. What is your preferred method for sharing that report? I know that Google makes it pretty handy and probably just has a URL that you can copy and send to somebody. But I mean, are you printing these out? Are you PDFing them? Are you just sending someone the link? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so if anybody attending has been on one of these calls with me, I usually have a little spiel before we start. So you could see in the examples, I make my dashboards, reports, or whatever we're making in Data Studio vertical because I do it with the impression that somebody is probably going to print that off and then go hand it to somebody else. And so when you're printing things off, obviously we're used to kind of that portrait mode and seeing things that way. It doesn't translate as well to a computer screen, which are horizontal. So it kind of depends on how you're going to view that data. You can in Data Studio download it as a PDF, but doing that, you kind of negate your filters and your different dynamic aspects of your dashboard because you can't use those in a PDF. So I think it kind of depends if you know the person you're giving it to is the kind of person that's going to print it out and look at it. You can kind of let that decide not only how you format it, but maybe you don't use the filters because you know that they're not going to use them, or before you even send it to them, you have the filters set in a way that they're not going to have to mess with it. But if you know it's somebody that is maybe more tech savvy or is going to look at it on the computer, I would probably design it horizontal. You have a lot more room to play with it. I think it looks a little bit nicer horizontal, and then you can utilize those filters a lot more dynamically.